Hello and welcome back to another episode of MCU Need to Know, a podcast dedicated to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything you need to know. I'm Trey.
I'm Jude. How you doing, Trey?
I am doing all right. It's been incredibly rainy where I'm at, and so that has made work difficult. So it's been a little bit longer days trying to catch up. Other than that, there's not too much to complain about, just a little more tired than usual.
Man, there just must be a lot of storms or something, or it's coming this way. Just because we've had rain off and on the past couple of days.
It has been all week, and it's the worst kind of rain where it's not enough to kind of like easily call you, like it's not enough to easily call it a rain out,
right? But
it's enough to be annoying and soaked for the entire day.
Oh man, okay, so I remember 8th grade playing football. I'd be so disappointed when it rained like mid-afternoon because it would stop, and I just knew it would be so humid at practice. Yeah, those are the worst.
Get all muddy with all the cleats tearing up the yard. And, it wasn't bad if it was raining during practice, but if it stopped before you got to practice, that's when it sucked.
Yeah.
But what about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. We will get to let's see. I know this is delayed, but I'm finishing up summer school this week. Tomorrow is the last day, Friday. We record Thursdays, so I'm excited about that. And then officially, I'll have July off for summer.
That'll be awesome.
Although I think this episode will drop in July, so as you're listening, I'm off.
I know we know, and I'm sure they've picked up on it by now, but it's so weird being off sync with what people are listening to and what we're recording.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was, we wanted to have that backlog and stuff. But once Falcon and Winter Soldier comes out, Black Widow, that's going to, supersede what we've been doing, and we'll be much more current.
Yeah, that'll be fun to be able to have a little bit more instantaneous conversation with the audience that way.
Yeah. That's why I got to make sure I speed up my editing.
Oh, God, me too, dude. I feel so behind. I don't think it's an understatement and everybody feels that 2020 has been wild.
Yeah, it is. Thanos has the time stone. He has reality stone. He has all of them.
Oh, man. Let's hope it doesn't take...
Go for the head.
Let's hope it doesn't take 5 years to get back on track. And now that I bummed us out...
That's a scary thought.
Oh, man. But if you don't know what we're doing, we have been discussing Daredevil Season 1 from Netflix. We're currently on Episode 11, The Path of the Righteous. So we open up immediately with Fisk rushing Vanessa into the hospital room from the previous episode. The doctors are gathering questions to try and figure out what's wrong with her, and Wesley does his best to try and relay details. When Fisk tries to follow Vanessa back into the actual hospital, he gets told to stay up here.
Okay, I'm going to read my notes out of order. Maybe the nurse should fight Fisk. I mean, she was a force, man.
I don't think we've seen anybody stop Fisk like that.
No, do you know who I am? I don't care. It's great.
Oh, man. Yeah, if Matt has another one of his Nobu encounters where he's on the brink of death, we'll see if she'll go in instead.
Yeah. So I'm guessing, thinking about how the end of that last episode and this is going, and if we're tracking Fisk, like his own story arc, this is his Belly of the Beast moment episode kind of in here, maybe? It's hard to do that, because as a villain, you expect him to lose in the end. But to have that long-form storytelling and to develop his character the way they've been doing and showing how vulnerable he is, I would think that's where we're at in his story right now.
I'm glad you brought that up, because one of my first notes, and again, I mean, you and I both take notes sequentially, so I don't have everything listed out in this first note because I kind of come to this conclusion as the episode goes on. But something that I found interesting, and I want to see if I'm just kind of curtains are just blue or if you kind of see meaning here too. But I remember back in college, I took one film class, and the professor said something that stuck out to me that I think about every time I see this happen in movies or TV, is that whenever you see like a TV that's playing something in the background, that's the visual equivalent of quoting somebody in a novel or something like that. And I always try and like see if you can derive meaning from what's being quote unquote quoted. And in this scene in particular, we have this cartoon that this child is watching before Fisk rushes in, where it's I think it's a giant rooster and a chicken fighting, and the smaller rooster gets knocked out and has like a bucket over its head. And then by the end of the scene, you see that smaller chicken is having his wing raised up like he's the victor over the bigger chicken.
I'll take that a step further. Like in my notes, I said, love the cartoon Big Beast beating little blind guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I took the smaller one, like he was blind. And then when you come back, I thought it was interesting because it was right after, it was over Fisk's shoulder when he was holding up the winner. It was the little guy. Right after that interaction with the nurse.
Yeah.
So that was part of to me, I took that as kind of that belly of the beast signaling that turn where it seemed like Fisk had all that control, media, police on the payroll, all of that kind of stuff. And now we're starting to see that turn.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I took it.
And that's what kind of like led me into this, because for so long we've watched this inverse relationship between Matt and Fisk, where Matt is falling and Fisk is rising. And like you said, this is the belly of the beast. We're seeing that tide turn. And I like that you read the bucket as like the blindness, because I didn't pick up on that, but that's really good. For me, like, I guess I took the bucket as armor, which we don't know at the beginning, but this is the episode where Matt finally starts to get serious about creating his suit of armor.
Right.
So I don't know. I just thought that was cool to kind of track throughout the remainder of the episode.
Yeah. I feel like that, I don't know any meaning I derive out of that as much as it's like a little nod to the way the series is going, because I mean, again, you're not watching this. Well, I mean, I don't know if you're watching Infinity War and expecting how Infinity War ended, but like you're not expecting Daredevil to lose. So,
right.
So I feel like it was like a nice little Easter egg nod to people watching, if that makes sense.
And it makes total sense, because I think eventually I come to the conclusion it's almost similar in the way in episode 6 where Matt and Vladimir, where we feel like we have that breakthrough with Vladimir where he's actually going to give information. And you and I both discussed, intellectually, we knew it'd be too early for that, but emotionally, we still felt like it was possible. And like you said, intellectually, we know Daredevil's going to win, but emotionally, he's been like on the ropes for so long. So I think even if you don't notice it, like I think subconsciously, this is the way the creators are signaling to us that things are on the rise for Matt.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't... Like, I'd love to add to that, but you hit the nail on the head. Like, this is kind of that subconscious in the background. Even the music, that goes with the cartoon all pushes us in that direction.
Mm-hmm. The only other note that I have is I don't know if Leland is responsible for poisoning the drinks, but his behavior in this scene totally feels like when a kid is trying to cover up for something they did wrong.
Yeah. Shouldn't somebody be checking me out? Like, and all I wrote was Leland being Leland. Like, he's very...
petulant.
Yeah. I have another thought on Leland, but I'm going to save it to another scene.
Okay.
But yeah, like he just, yeah, like, I mean, clearly, like Vanessa's critical, and he's all like, well, I held a drink.
God.
There's like foam coming from the mouth on Vanessa. I held a drink.
Shouldn't someone be checking me out? Oh, man. So after the title sequence, we do return back to Matt's apartment where Karen is trying to get Matt to answer the door. After beating on the door for a while, Matt eventually lets her in, and she begins to question the very nature of Matt's accident and the confrontation between Matt and Foggy.
You know what? I'm trying to remember, because I have it as Matt really didn't want to answer the door. And then something alerted to him and made him do it. And I guess maybe he realized it was Karen.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't tell. There was an element of not sloppiness or carelessness, but it was like, while he went with the I got hit by a car story, it wasn't very convincing.
No. And it could be because, and kind of circling back to your point about like something made him open the door, and whether or not it's realizing it's Karen, if we're try and take a peek into where he's at emotionally, because obviously he is almost mortally wounded. He's dealing with that. But I think a lot of his being down in the dumps has to do with coming off the confrontation with Foggy. And I think emotionally there's a part of him that's like, what got me here was not being honest with my friends. I think realizing it was Karen at the door forced him to get up. And then as far as the sloppiness with the car, even if he's not ready to reveal the entire story, I think there's a part of him that's relenting and understanding he needs to be more honest about what was going on. He just doesn't know how to do it.
Do you think he wants to get caught right here?
That's what I think.
For Karen to know?
I think that's what it is. It's like, it's less about caring about the secret and more just like, if she figures it out kind of thing, which, I mean, that's me making a huge reach, but it's me trying to fit the pieces.
But the thing is, like, I think the way this scene plays out, you can tell Karen's onto something.
Mm-hmm.
You know, was it Fisk? You know, who did this to you? Was it Fisk? Kind of stuff. You know, it was interesting to me that Matt threw that little jab back when she tried to comfort him. It's like, hey, remember the last time I was here and you comforted me? And he's like, yeah, and you lied to me.
Yeah.
And there was where I thought he was about to kind of slip up.
Yeah.
You know, because then he had to follow that up, you know, with, oh, you had these things and didn't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
But without that, yeah, I think I kind of feel like that was meant to be almost a slip up right there.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we've seen him, you know, there's precedent. He almost did that in the flashback scenes with Foggy. And so it's very plausible that he would do it here.
And here, Karen tells about the visit that her and Ben took to go see Fisk's mom. And Matt said, hey, you need to be more careful. But what I found interesting is, like, I kind of tracked this through. Matt basically pointed out how that information wasn't as good as, you know, Karen thought it was.
Right. I want to say this because this is a mistake on my part. I completely missed the fact that Fisk's mother was allegedly dead, which I think if I would have had that in mind, that would have helped amplify the importance of Karen finding her last episode. So I didn't keep that in mind. So I think that's another reason why I kind of felt a little underwhelming. But even still, like you said, people are pushing back against this notion that it's a thing. And I kind of like that because, again, like you said, we know Daredevil is going to win, even outside of having already seen this, even though I've forgotten. This continuous thread of like pushing back on it being important, I'm assuming is going to amplify whatever the solution turns out to be.
I don't remember them ever mentioning Fisk's mom being dead before.
I
feel like that was the first we heard it.
If that's the case, then I feel vindicated from last week's episode.
You know, I could have missed it, but I feel like that's the first we heard it.
Like, it's weird. Like, I want to say that I somehow knew that, but it was a casual, like a throwaway line. But
yeah,
I the only thing I can think of is during the dating scenes with Vanessa where it got brought up. But you may be right. Maybe it wasn't plainly stated that.
Yeah, because even in there, he talked about how he went away to live with family and then came back. Mm-hmm. But I don't remember him mentioning his mom passing.
Well, then that's just bad writing.
Well, and up until this point, up until this point, you know, nobody knew about his past anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think that was the first time it was mentioned.
Okay, I don't like this scene. Now that I think about it, that feels unfair to kind of just drop.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to research that out and double check, but I feel like that's the case.
Mm-hmm. The only other note that I have is maybe this is representative of my own cold heart, but I honestly don't know what the purpose of Karen bringing the balloon was for, but I wouldn't trade a thing just to have that scene where Matt is sitting there holding the balloon at the end of the scene. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, I liked it.
It was so, like, it's obviously sad, but I couldn't help but laugh just watching it.
Yeah, no. I liked it. It was a good touch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing is you know that Matt, with his abilities,
mm-hmm.
knew it was a balloon, probably even knew a monkey was on it,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
So.
So after Karen and Matt's meeting, we do find ourselves waking up with Foggy, who is ignoring Karen's call. And as he continues to come to, we learn that he has spent the night with Marcy.
I had mixed feelings about this scene and how I see Foggy and how I think of him as a character. So he woke up and he's hungover,
mm-hmm.
right? So he went out drinking. And it had to be after he left Matt's.
Yeah.
So there's an element of like, was that already going on between him and Marcy? Did he just randomly show up and he's kind of using her? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the way the scene plays out, she clearly doesn't mind being used, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It just seemed weird.
It's 100% weird. And I, in my notes, I put neither one of us mentioned the line a few episodes ago where Foggy throws away a line of him back channeling with Marcy to get information.
Right.
And it's one, I'm surprised we didn't bring it up because I think that at the time, I know the Union Allied case has kind of fallen through, but at the time, I think that would have been a conflict of interest. And then two, we've both stated how we're not fans of the way they're handling the Foggy Karen relationship.
Right.
But this is like another weird out of left field thing where we on text see this thing happening between Karen and Foggy, and then out of text he's back with Marcy, and so it's just like this disjointed weird roadmap that it doesn't make any sense.
Well, even that line, the back channeling line, I believe you're right on the conflict of interest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they're opposite sides of a case. But that line really could be played in one or two ways, depending on how they deliver it.
Well, because right after
like
he
you
says
could literally be doing back channeling with Marcy that has no connotations, innuendos at all.
Right.
But you could also do it in the way they did do it with delivering the line where it goes that way, So yeah.
Especially because the way he delivers it is kind of like under his breath, looking to the side, ashamed, and then they have Karen go like, "Oh, gross." So it's like,
right.
That's clearly how they wanted us to read it. And it's just, I don't know. It's weird that it's almost like they had no plans and they dropped the Foggy Karen line.
Yeah, and so it just, I mean, I get you're trying to show how distraught I guess he is about what happened, between him and Matt finding out that he's the man in the mask, and all of that, took the sign, threw it in the trash, or and all that. I don't know. It just seemed like a weird choice to go that way.
Yeah, especially after how much they've sown seeds of Foggy calling out Matt for being, like a womanizer.
Right, and they really started to make, trying to show Foggy as this good moral person.
Yeah.
And again, it's weird to say that because, like, you don't know, did he end up there because he's been seeing her again? And then it makes it feel a little less like, oh, what are you doing? But the way it's just done, it feels like you're using that person. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. All I can say is we've been proven wrong before where it plays importance later, like with, the Blake thing. We both thought it was weird that they kept him alive and then it came into play. So maybe we've got, 2 more episodes to go. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. Well, but even if you wanted to go that direction, right? Having him wake up the next morning hungover versus like them having, I don't know, like them meeting in a scene together some way. Like, in other words, does that make sense? Like having those characters cross paths again because he goes and having it be revealed in that way versus another way. That's I don't know. It's just a weird choice.
You could chronicle it. What am I trying to say? Chronicle it? That's not it. Is that the right phrase? Chronicle it?
Maybe is what you're trying to say.
Basically, you could show step by step how he got there and it would be less jarring than what they did.
Right.
There's a word for that. I don't think chronicle is the right one, but you get the idea.
Right. No. I get what you're saying.
Oh, man. Yeah. So after the scene where we discover that Foggy has been with Marcy, we return back to Fisk, who is waiting nervously in the hospital waiting room, and his entire guard team fills the room. Leland begins to express his concerns to Wesley about Fisk being distracted and that he needs to get his head back into the game.
So was Leland pushing Wesley towards Nobu? Like did he know it was Gal and was he covering by pushing him in Nobu's direction?
It certainly felt that way. It doesn't feel genuine.
Right.
And it's again, it's the same behavior of like a kid who has done wrong and they're overcompensating for the fact, and it just doesn't come across as genuine.
Yeah. Now, I will say I side with Leland a little bit here, where his focus is on business. I mean, he's the money person for this organization, not just Fisk, but multiple organizations. I mean, that is going to be his focus. That's in an organization, that is someone's job to make sure the organization keeps running. And so I was kind of in a weird way sided with Leland of like, hey, business is still going.
Yeah. And again, I've been trying to track whether or not Leland had a part in this or not. And I think it's very telling, like you said, that his main concern here is that Fisk is predisposed, and it's not that he's concerned about Vanessa's well-being. And if we follow this through, and he is very concerned about keeping business going, and he agrees that Vanessa's been a distraction, then, we see how little care he has. So I don't think it would be a stretch to see him wanting to take her out.
Yeah. I got a nice chuckle, though, out of Wesley's line, where he said, "It's been an honor doing business with you." when Leland's all, and what if it was Gal?
I'm going to read my note straight. Wesley has some great lines in this scene, but his delivery of "it's been an honor doing business with you" might be contended for best of the season. That line was incredible. Especially because how much Wesley has just had it with Leland.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
It's just like, you could tell he took joy in saying that.
Yeah, because it was the scene before, or the episode before, 2 episodes before, where they were at Fisk's apartment, and you could tell that they really didn't get along. Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, "I don't like you, but you don't see me lighting a match."
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
After that interaction, we cut back to Matt's apartment. Claire is there and stitching or restitching Matt back together. At this point, she re-insists, because I think she mentioned it once before, about him getting some body armor. Matt, it seems like, tries to rekindle some old flame by offering a drink. And then they discuss what the nature of their relationship is going to be moving forward.
So, this is a bit of a long-winded note, but just follow through with me. The MCU has done a great job of grounding the fantastical in reality. For example, Thor isn't a literal god. Vulture isn't a bird person. He's a person that uses technology to create that persona.
Right.
So it grounds these characters more than their comic book counterparts. And I think the thing that I love about Matt and Claire's dynamic a lot is that it feels like they are the embodiment of that push and pull between fantastical and realistic. Because, here she is, using her medical knowledge to heal Matt, and he's discussing his, I use meditation to help me heal up faster, and some of his superpowers that allows him to regain that health.
Right.
And so it's that cool push and pull that I really like about them a lot.
I'm glad that you pulled that part out of the scene, because I think you mentioned in your favorite episode on Stick, that
you baited me, because I literally got my head in the mind frame of Condemned for a second and thought about their scenes there.
Well, I think it was that episode where you mentioned they introduced a supernatural element. I like in that, because he says, meditate, you'll heal faster, black sky and all that. And so I think they did a good job of laying in that supernatural element early on for that line. It doesn't seem out of the place or foreign, so to speak.
And it's funny, this is a tangent, but you just sparked a memory in me. It's almost kind of similar into the way with the Avengers, the first movie. I remember being so not off put, but I thought it was weird how we were getting the scene of, I'm going to get this wrong. Was it the seer? It was the person who was conveying knowledge to Thanos. I think they had the scene with Loki and that henchman, and Thanos was in the background. And I remember thinking wow, this feels this feels like a stretch, like, because we haven't seen the universe getting this far out there.
Yeah.
And you almost have to have that kind of, not rude awakening, but similar to a rude awakening to get comfortable where we get to Endgame and we're seeing Peter Parker swinging off Mjolnir and then being caught on a Pegasus and like all those fantastical stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, you got to go back to Doctor Strange, you know, where they start easing us into that stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm thinking of the wrong scene.
Or what are you referencing?
The one you were describing.
Oh, at the final Endgame fight.
Right. No. With Loki and.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like you said, they're easing you into it.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I ruined your point. It was a good one, though.
I don't think you did.
Oh, okay.
Well, because I mean, like, we can follow that with Doctor Strange, like, you know, potential spoilers if you don't want to know the plans of future movies, but giving them a second to skip ahead. But the second Doctor Strange is called Multiverse of Madness, in the Multiverse of Madness. And if we never would have taken the time to kind of ease ourselves into the multiverse in the first one, I don't think we would have been prepared. So I that's how I took your Doctor Strange point.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So we're on the same page on that. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and in that, the main thing that I got out of this scene is that missed opportunity between them. You know, and I like that term, the push and pull, because you can tell they still at this point wanted something to happen. And Claire had that line that was, for better or worse, in terms of Matt being Daredevil. And my note, what I added, I was like, he's married to the city, for better or worse, right? Like it is a level of commitment that I think even Foggy pointed out. Like, no, to be able to do this, you don't just decide randomly one day. You've still been training. Like, he's married to this idea, and it just wouldn't be conducive for that relationship to work.
And it's such a great use of, I don't know, I guess trope of like our hero wanting to get to a point where they don't have to do it anymore. But Claire points out there's never going to be a point where he stops being Daredevil. So you framing it as he's married to this ideology is a great way to frame it.
Now, the one last thing I had on this scene for me, and I got a little distracted by this, the apartment looked different.
Huh.
Yeah, the stairs weren't there.
That's interesting. I didn't pick up on that.
And like the doors that would be locked at the end of the stairs weren't in the right place.
I'll have to pay attention to that and rewatch that.
And so I'm wondering if they just went back and had to do a makeup shoot for that scene at some point. It's I'll have to point it out to you, but it's just like the floor plan of that apartment. It was like they was in a different place.
I mean, it always comes to those things where like, you know, they use different sets for the quote unquote same location to get different angles, or I guess what's available to them. So yeah. I normally I like picking up on that stuff because, again, another tangent. One of my favorite ones is, again, I know you've been watching Community. In that pilot episode, there's a scene where Jeff like climbs the stairs. And that's the last time you ever see anybody climb a stairs to get to the study room because it's on ground floor in the rest of the series.
Wait, he climbs stairs?
Yeah, when he walks back in with the test answers.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to go check that
It's
again.
fun to pick up those little things.
Yeah.
Look, that's a tangent, but I think by now everybody can figure out I'm trying to get a Community spinoff podcast going. One of the things, my only other note for this scene is that I can tell that Foggy and Matt are close friends because we pointed out like that one time like where Foggy and Karen were on their date and Foggy makes the conversation about Matt. Why the heck did Matt offer up that he offered up another woman a drink in his apartment? Like, there was no reason to bring that up.
I know. That was, yeah.
They're both great at putting their foot in their mouth.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was a huge mistake on his part in terms of dating, you know.
I don't know. Maybe it's to show their innocent, like, not thinking stuff out, because you can immediately see him on his face like, oh, why did I say that?
Yeah. Well, and I think in the writing they acknowledged it because she even Claire made some comment about getting around. So yeah, so at least even in the thing they acknowledged it.
So after Matt and Claire reconvene, we do join back with Karen and Ben, who are at the docks. Ben is very clearly upset with Karen and explains to her how bad it was that she used him for the trip to the nursing home. Karen insists that if they don't do anything, Wilson Fisk is going to win. I can...
Okay. No, I was laughing. Okay, so there was a little bit of listener interaction, and I thought that was great. And it was about my comments, putting LOL. And my comment here was like, he's still mad. And then in quotes, like, you give a damn. Hey, that's not fair, right? That's what their Karen and Ben's interaction was. And then my notes in all caps, it's 100% fair. like, no, it's 100% fair. What's wrong with you?
By the way, regarding the listener feedback, I want to say thank you to Sabrina over on YouTube for giving us a feedback on your note taking.
Yes, thank you.
But no, yeah, like, I mean, playing off what you said, I'm so glad that we're seeing some pushback from Ben this episode. We were both clearly upset with the way Karen manipulated Ben last episode, and it would have felt like they just hand waved it away because they got what they wanted by finding Vistain. But it shows like Ben is an actual character to see that he's upset. Like, it's not like they just got what they wanted and dropped that plot line.
Oh yeah. And what did he say? He said something along the lines of reiterating how, yes, he realizes it was important, but it's not as, his wife's more important. I did find it interesting. This is the second time this episode someone has told Karen her information is not as good as she thinks it is. And now I want to rethink, because like, I think she even mentioned like Fisk's mom's supposed to be dead again somewhere in here. But and I guess the reason why I didn't note that down, because what Ben was saying, I thought is really what stood out to me, where he was kind of spinning like, this is how Fisk would spin it, and just showing it's like, not only is it like the question of reliability, right? How you got the information, who told you, but in dealing with Fisk and his owning media outlets, or having them in his pocket, so to speak, he's going to be able to spin this any way he wants.
Right. I like that you mentioned the tracking of Karen's information being, kind of pushed back on and put down, which is hard because obviously Karen is a very passionate person and we've been seeing her try to make a change. So that it sucks to see this last cling of hope that she has. But I like that it's creating this sense of desperation and like hopelessness and trying to find something that will bring down Fisk, because eventually we know the good guys win. And if they're cornering us in this situation where it feels like it's impossible to happen, it's going to make that catharsis feel better.
Right. Well, and I think it also helps kind of what we were saying about this probably being that belly of the beast episode or area of the arc for Fisk. Because also in doing that, Ben's pointing out that, yeah, like you get to the top by making a bunch of enemies. And so it's like that. It's like a moment now to in that hope, right, that to continue to tear down our antagonist.
Which I have more to touch on, but let me go ahead and set up this next scene, and then I'll jump into that point because they tie into each other really well, especially the way that it transitions from this scene to the next. But
oh yeah.
Well, I guess I should ask, do you have any other notes in this scene?
No. In fact, I was almost about to start blending into the next scene.
My bad.
Anyways.
Do we want to redo this? Okay.
No, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
So this is staying in, by the way. You guys get to see a peek behind the curtain here.
Well, no, yeah, go ahead. No, like I stopped because I just I don't know why. Like I was naturally going and I hesitated. But whatever.
Let's keep
roll.
going. So in the next scene, Wesley joins Fisk in the waiting room, trying to console him. Wesley relays Leland's suspicion that Nomu did it, but Fisk shares details about why he thinks it might be Gal. Eventually, as they're having their conversation back and forth, a doctor does enter in and tells Fisk that Vanessa's going to make it. So again, like I was saying, playing off what you were saying about you don't get to be the man at the top without making a few enemies. I like that. I like this contrast of having Ben and Karen in the previous scene, putting Fisk in this on a pedestal image of like, he's impossible to take down. And in the very next scene, we see him, like you said, at his lowest. He's clearly upset and worried about Vanessa. And we've mentioned before, but there are far more scenes of Fisk vulnerable than there are of him in power. And it reminds me of something I felt whenever I played the Batman Arkham games. Did you ever play those?
No, unfortunately. I have friends who, if and when they listen to this episode, they're going to be shaking their head because they've been trying to get me to do this for years.
They're good. You should play them.
Right. Okay. I kind of didn't want that on the record, but
I'm sorry.
It's out there now. No.
Anyway,
Go ahead. Put it out
the
there.
point I'm trying to make is one of the things that I always found fascinating when I played those games is that in almost every depiction of Batman we've seen, he is this imposing, unstoppable shadow come to life. Like he's moving in and out of the shadows and taking people down. And that's what we've grown to know Batman as. But when you play him as in the game and you're actually coming across enemies and then, having to take cover, you see Batman running away. And that's something you never see. And it's like that vulnerable side. And that's what I'm feeling whenever I see them transitioning to Fisk just sitting there beaten down.
Yeah. Well, and on that line about this vulnerability that we've seen in Fisk, Wesley and Fisk have a nice little moment there.
Yeah.
And a question I had for you, do you think this is the most Wesley has ever heard verbally from Fisk in that kind of way, like that deep care of each other?
It doesn't. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely the most we've seen on screen.
Yeah. Well, because it was like he went to say something and he didn't, and Wesley just had like this nod, like knowing nod, like you don't have to say anything, I already know. And so that just, the way that kind of played out, it almost made me wonder, it made me wonder, wow, is this the first time Fisk has shown Wesley the kind of affection Wesley shows for Fisk?
Definitely in the text, but if I'm trying to think through like a realistic nature of this type of relationship, I don't think you could get to the adoration that Wesley has for Fisk without there being examples of that prior.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Especially because like we've seen, we talked about it, whenever they were having their meeting in the car, Wesley had his glasses off, which again, you can push back whether or not that's curtains are blue, but it shows a level of comfort that Wesley had. Like it was more than just business for them. These were friends. And we've seen Fisk, I think multiple times throughout this episode, very genuinely just say, thank you, Wesley. And I think Wesley knows that he's a person that has a hard time expressing emotion. So seeing him get choked up here, like he knows all he needs to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Now, the one last thing from here, I think we see that Fisk no longer trusts Leland.
Yes.
Well, because he was arranging for Vanessa to leave the country, set it up, is what he said. And when Wesley's like, well, I'll get Leland to handle it. He's like, no, do it personally. Fisk trying to have as few people possible have that information where Vanessa is.
Yeah. And the thing I liked about this is that it pairs really well with that piece that Ben was writing, which ultimately never came out. But, Ben had a line in there that said something about how there's an upper class of people that give more than they deserve and they get happy endings. And, Fisk and Wesley are having this conversation where Fisk wants to send Vanessa away. And Wesley says, I don't think she'll like that. And Fisk says something to the line of like, we don't always get what we want or deserve.
Right.
And Wesley immediately pushes back and he says, but some of us deserve to. Right. And the thing I like about this is that, we see Wesley trying to assuage Fisk's fears, but we also kind of get a glimpse into Wesley's psyche and his decision making. Like we see, if he is this person in the opposite of Ben who believes that some people deserve to get this kind of stuff, it makes sense how he's gotten to this point where he is Fisk's right-hand man.
Yeah. Okay, so given what we've seen of Wesley so far in this episode, and Wesley says, I suspect everyone.
Yeah.
Now do we take that to mean he sent Leland to speak to Gal hoping to find out, like it reveals that it's Gal and Leland dies?
I didn't think of that, but that fits. I mean, if he does suspect everyone, we've seen Fisk definitely has a penchant for putting people together in hopes that they take each other out. And it wouldn't be a stretch to see that Wesley would do the same.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think that, but you asking it, my answer is yes. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a real good catch.
Okay. Well, when they don't have, another character spell it out for us, sorry, I shouldn't take shots at the other episodes, but yeah.
So after Fisk learns that Vanessa is going to be okay, we join Matt, who has returned to the church with Father Latham. Father Latham questions whether or not that Matt was able to kill the man that they spoke of, and Matt offers that he wasn't able to.
I think here we get the answer to what we already suspected. Father Latham knows Matt's Daredevil, and they have their conversation, and Matt takes it in the direction of God's purpose. What is this purpose? Why do I have these feelings of wanting to let the devil out? And Latham's, I thought it was kind of clever the way the writers took Latham's response, because to me, this is where Daredevil was born or is born, right? Because he pushes him in the direction of like becoming a symbol. And so that's one of the things I really liked about this scene.
That pairs well with what my biggest takeaway from the scene is that, Matt mentions that he's not afraid of dying, to which Father Latham mentions that it's living that scares most people. And I like that this glimpse that we get into Matt's mind, because we see this struggle on a daily basis where he has this internal rage between angels and devils inside him. And it kind of gives us an explanation where the easiest answer is for Matt to go out there and risk his life, because if he dies, then it's an end to that struggle. And we've seen that because repeatedly throughout the season, he's not really had a concrete plan on what he's doing. He's just going out there and putting himself in danger.
Right.
And I like that Father Latham states it's not, well, doesn't plainly state it, but he gives that impression that it's not just that he can go out there and take punishment and dole out justice, but he's someone that can get close to the fire without being corruptible. And he says it in that to summon the better angels of his nature line. It feels like it gives a deeper purpose to the character, and I think that's something he's been searching for all season long.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think he gets the answer to what he's searching for, of this deeper purpose. I don't know. I think one of the things that made me uneasy about this scene, and now part of it is because of me and who I am and what I do for a living, right?
Fight crime?
Yeah. Man, all kinds of secrets coming out now. But yeah, no, I get I liked the moment, but but this time around I felt conflicted because as I'm following it through and tracking it in the way I've been tracking the season this time through, I'm like, is that really? I mean, essentially, Father Latham created Daredevil, and it was like, is that really the best advice Latham should have given? And so I get that in that world and in the context of the show, it is, but there's an element to me as well that I'm just like, you're kind of encouraging him to continue doing what he's doing, which is being a vigilante and breaking the law and whatnot. And I think part of that is just watching this now versus in 2015, and we mentioned this in other episodes, tracking the kill code, Human Shield, Natasha did it. This genre becoming more highly aware now of things like collateral damage and stuff like that. And so I think it's with that lens that I kind of had pause at how the Daredevil character was born in this series.
I do want to point out, because I didn't say it, but you said it, and then in my note I put he can become a symbol now. We've been doing it all season, but it's funny how many comparisons we can draw to the Nolan Batman becoming more than just a man.
Oh yeah, right, and become a symbol. Yeah. Something. Yeah. What did you say? Elemental. So yeah.
So after his conversation with Father Latham, we do return back to Matt's apartment where he begins to meditate. While he's in a trance, he does have flashbacks to his fight with Nobu and relives the pain of the fight with Nobu and Fisk. Eventually, the memory of the fight jolts him back to reality, and he dons his black mask. We immediately cut to Turk running away frantically, where Matt eventually gets him and interrogates him about where he can get armor like Fisk.
Yeah, I liked the flashbacks disrupting the meditation. I don't know. I just took it as like this hints of PTSD. Like it has that. I mean, you got to imagine everything Matt's seen and done. Like it has to take this toll, right? And if meditation is supposed to be, what he does to get himself right, physically, and all, emotionally and all that. I like that he can't just jump right into it and everything's okay.
Yeah, I mean it almost like if we go out on this limb about his meditation being ways to heal him, if seeing this PTSD stop that process, it just kind of gives us a deeper look of like he needs to confront those issues first before he can fully move on, kind of thing. My biggest takeaway from the scene was that given everything that's going on right now with police brutality and the Black Lives Matter movement, this scene was incredibly hard to watch, especially because of a specific line. After Matt corners Turk and he starts beating on him, Turk says, "What are you beating up on me for? I didn't do nothing." That phrase, "I didn't do nothing," has been used as a dog whistle to stereotype victims of police brutality and undercut the mistreatment that they've been dealing with. Granted, I know this show was in 2015 and we're here in 2020 and the way that we're approaching this stuff is a lot different. But I think it speaks volumes about the way the police brutality against Black Americans and other minorities was so ingrained that it didn't stick out to me then, but it definitely sticks out to me now. And it just made it really uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah. Well, and let me not to get away from this point. So let me say this and weave back to it. I think there's a couple of other things like the episode we brought up with Claire, and just the whole purpose for her in that episode was giving Matt someone to save, and the problems with that. And I think there's a number of things that one sticks out, that it's just kind of like test of time and just what happens in 5 years, right? That changes how we view things. And I think we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, how we've seen Turk as an arms dealer. We've seen Turk set up the Russians. We've seen Turk in the opening scene with like the human trafficking. So we clearly know who Turk is. But at the same time, there's a certain level of expectations you have of your heroes, right? Like, or your protagonist, where it's like, it just felt just like, I don't know, like, hey, I'm just going to beat whoever I need to. And we've already seen Matt do that before, let the devil out and beat whoever I need to. And yeah, like seeing it now through that lens, I'm trying to imagine, would it have been any different if they, as a show creators, showed him stopping a crime? Well, and then asking for information, as opposed to just like you know what I mean, and as opposed to just finding him randomly on the street. And I don't know if even that would be that much different, or in terms of difficult to watch.
Right, and because I wrote that down. We've seen other situations where Matt has beat up on people before, but the difference here is we're seeing Matt do this on someone who wasn't actively hurting another person. So again, like you said, we can get into these weird gray areas of knowing that Turk is an arms dealer, but there's less of a direct reasoning for Matt's interference than, say, with the man who was intimidating the juror or the man who kidnapped the little kid. And so it feels uncomfortable that in those other scenes they took the time to give us those reasonings, but here it's just straight up he's going to beat up on whoever he wants. And it just, again, going through the lens of what's going on with police brutality, again, Matt's not a cop, but it's almost kind of that fantasy of like dealing out justice on your own terms, not being accountable to anyone, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, and I mean, to take that a step further, it's not just that, it's look at the character Turk. Who did they cast? Right. So it is a stereotype. And so what does that tell us
Mm-hmm.
That is a stereotype type of character. You know what I mean? The criminal element and all of that, and I think this is where there's a heightened awareness now. And I say now, it's not like that heightened awareness hasn't been around for many years.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're seeing a reaction is a heightened awareness at a wider spread audience, actually, if that makes sense.
It's telling how, like I said, it's telling how ingrained it was then, and now that we've kind of been opened up to that conversation more, it sticks out.
Yes.
I do want to say this, though, stepping back within the context of the show, whatever is happening there, I do find it interesting that whenever it gets to the point that Matt was like, okay, well, you're no use to me, I'm going to throw you off the side of the roof, they took the time to show us a shot of the dumpster.
Uh-huh.
We've seen that Matt clearly has no qualms about dropping people off a roof before.
Right.
So my question is, do you think it was all for show, or do you think Matt was serious about throwing him over?
You know what? I was wondering the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me wants to say his character has developed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've tracked that. So we have, you almost have to believe it was for show,
Mm-hmm.
right? But basically the question is, if Turk didn't give up the information, would he have followed through with it?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of want to say he does.
You think he would have thrown him off?
I kind of want to say he does.
And that makes it even worse for the previous thing we just discussed.
I mean, I
don't know. It's just like,
I mean, basically what we're doing is you're trying to imagine, does Turk, if this guy Turk calls his bluff, what he's relying on for that information is, I've done it before. He knows I've done it before, right? So the threat, you know what I mean? Like if you think through this logically, it's either he's willing to do it, or he's relying on the fact that he's done it before, and so Turk will believe him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I say it's like to do that kind of move, you have to know that he's not going to call that bluff, or you have to be willing to do it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Matt does have the, like you said, human lie detector test, so I guess we could lean on that, but like you said.
Well, maybe, yeah. I don't know. I was about to say something to kind of make light of it, but maybe I shouldn't. Well, I mean, he had the amazing shot. I'm going to say it. He had the amazing shot with the fire extinguisher.
Mm-hmm.
So we know he's going to hit the dumpster.
Yeah.
Like, Turk's not going to hit the concrete
mm-hmm.
in the sense, like, Matt's going to be accurate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to say that, yeah, he would have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I feel like you do.
Yeah.
Once Matt gets the information he needs from Turk, we cut back to the hospital where Fisk receives a phone call from his mom, and he ignores it or sends it to voicemail, I guess, because of his just focus on Vanessa. Fisk, steps outside, has a quick conversation with Wesley, letting her know mom called. Leland tries to get a word in, but Fisk is so focused on Vanessa that he just jumps right back into the room. From here, we're going to take a moment and skip a little small scene with Daredevil and kind of combine a scene further where after Wesley and Leland's conversation about, his interaction with Gal, we see Wesley return the phone call to Fisk's mother.
So in the spirit of combining these two scenes, I want to say that my biggest takeaway from this is that it almost feels like there's kind of a callback to when Wesley went to go retrieve the gun from the pinball, and you and I both said that it felt like it was below his pay grade. Him deciding that he was going to see to this matter with Fisk's mother,
mm-hmm.
It feels very similar in that being below his pay grade sort of feeling. And the fact that he has to borrow a gun and a vehicle from one of his subordinates shows that, and I'm peeking ahead here, it shows that Wesley and somewhat Fisk's lack of trust is their downfall.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because my note here is, well, he asked, did you talk to Gal? He says, I don't know. He said some mystical mumbo jumbo or whatever he said, and my note is, Leland would be the last person I'd trust to talk to Gal,
mm-hmm.
or to talk to anyone, honestly, in this situation.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw he's like, I don't know, was good or bad. Really? Like, you were trusting Leland to read the situation and report back.
Especially because Leland is so over everything. He just wants to get back to business.
Right.
So, I mean, he's not interested in figuring out who did this.
Well,
so, yeah.
And he's just interested in self-preservation. Check, do you need to check me out? Or he reached out to Nobu, and we've seen another scene where he's been talking to Gal already. So yeah, like it just kind of baffled me. Was like, what did Gal say? And it's like, you can't trust him anyways, So yeah, and so I found that weird about this scene, and weird not in a creator standpoint, but just a standpoint of like, this is like Wesley slipping up.
Which I want to say we called all the way back in episode 3.
Now, the phone call I found interesting because this is where Wesley finds out that Karen had been visited, and clearly, like, to reemphasize the closeness between Wesley and Fisk. And see, that was the thing you just mentioned about Wesley taking care of it himself. The way I read it was like Wesley knew about Fisk's mom and clearly had visited once before. But I took it as an effort of keeping that who knew about his mom close. That's why Wesley took it upon himself to kind of keep that inner circle close of who knew about his mom.
Right. But we see he doesn't attend to the mom. He immediately goes and takes out Karen. So I feel like you can order a subordinate to go take out Karen without having to explain why.
Right.
So, but I mean, I get what you're saying about, keeping that circle closed because not a lot of people know about Fisk's mother.
Okay.
Yeah. So a little bit of back and forth I can see on either side.
Yeah.
So after the hospital scenes, like we said, we're kind of taking these a little bit out of order because they're very short scenes layered in between each other. So we're combining these next two scenes. We do get to see that Matt eventually discovers the armory where Fisk gets all his suits made, and he comes across a person by the name of Melvin Potter. They begin to fight because Melvin doesn't trust him, and after the fight carries on for a while, they come to a truce, but Matt flat out takes him out and finally is able to talk some sense into him, and Matt learns who Porter is and is able to convince him to make him a suit.
Right. Now, one of the things that stood out to me about this was, and I think on your notes of the scene breakdown, why did I just lose it? I just scrolled.
It happens. I do it all the time.
I scrolled. It was like right in the middle of the screen, and I scrolled, and now it was gone.
Especially because my notes I'm reading off my iPad, and sometimes it'll start to dim, so I'll tap it to like wake it up, and then I'll accidentally scroll and lose my place.
Yeah, and okay, no, I found it. Okay, so are we keeping all that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was fine.
Okay, awesome.
I think it's your week to edit, so your discretion.
No, keep it.
No, it's my week to edit.
Okay, so what I do like about this scene, in your note it said the fight continues between Potter and Matt. Matt's clearly outmatched. I didn't read it as outmatched. I read it as still part of that injury, right? Like you saw him grab for his side. I mean, clearly Potter was, built and formidable, and a fighter, or able to handle himself, in that situation. But I was, in the back of my mind, I thought, oh, Matt's injured. I don't know if we could call it a true fair fight.
Well, here's my note. Like, I'm going to read it word for word because it acknowledges that, but I think it does. Well, here, I'll just read it. Potter is strong as hell. I'm sure Matt knew it was dumb to go out while he was still recovering. I don't think he was expecting the level of pushback he got from Potter. Because, I mean, we see a point where Potter is holding him up by the neck, and it doesn't look like he's breaking a sweat. So I do think there is an element of Matt being outmatched, and I do think he would have been significantly more competent if he wasn't injured. But I don't think he was expecting the level of strength that Potter had.
Right.
One of the things I wanted to ask is that we've talked about how Melvin Potter is a character in the comics who goes on to be the Gladiator. Here within the show, we learn that Potter is a person with special needs. He's very childlike in his nature. And a question I had is this a choice the show made, or is this comic book accurate with Melvin?
Honestly, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say it's a choice the show made, but that's kind of a gut reaction.
Mm-hmm.
I will say because of that, it does feel very manipulative on Daredevil's part. In terms of like he's saying, I can protect Betsy and making this promise. That I don't know because of as you said, playing the character as a special needs, that Potter might not fully understand,
Mm-hmm.
or have a different idea what that means and looks like, than what Daredevil's actually trying to promise here.
Yeah. It's not something that I picked up on, but as you're bringing up the fact that like that's a big promise that Matt's trying to portray, you're right. It does feel manipulative, and I don't know. It feels jarring because, and maybe it could be this is just the most that we've gotten out of Melvin. But it seems like it was a dramatic shift in the way the character was presented when it was just Fisk and Leland and Wesley to the way that he is behaving now. So that also could be adding into that feeling of manipulation.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I don't remember getting that sense of the character when we first saw him with Leland and Fisk.
And I mean, we did see where in the last time we met Potter, Leland had that line of like something like, that boy ain't half right. And Fisk says, it's the other half that I'm concerned. So they did plan it. We're just getting more exposed to the character in this scene than we did last time.
Yes. Yeah. After that, we find Foggy at Josie's having another night of drinking, as we stated he had probably the night before. And then Karen shows and starts to question Foggy about Matt and what's going on between them. And she relays the information she found out about Fisk's mom and kind of pleading to Foggy of not giving up this fight for Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, I didn't have too many notes for this particular scene just because it kind of felt like a rehash of what we've already seen with Karen and Matt. But the one thing I have is what we've been tracking so far. This is the third person to push back against Karen's information and state like it's not as important as you think it is. And by the third time, it almost starts to get this sense of like, is it not as important as Karen thinks it is, or is everybody just given up?
Well, it certainly feels like people are giving up, but Karen certainly isn't. Mm-hmm. I do like at the very end kind of that moment between them because we've been tracking them and it feels like they're developing a particular relationship. Mm-hmm. Where, and even if they're not going in the dating way, which we kind of thought they should and felt like, she's like, do you want to talk? He's like, yeah. But then she kind of perks up and then he's like, but I can't. And she's like, well, if you tell me it's complicated. And he's like, it's personal, which I thought was interesting for as close as they're getting. There's still that element of, how do I want to put this? There's still that element of like, as close as they're getting and as mad as he is at Matt, he's still willing to keep that secret.
Right. And I like the outburst on it's personal because we've clearly learned that Foggy is a person who does not like secrets. He's an honest person, right. Marcy scene withstanding. And so it, like you said, it's that between a rock and a hard place where he doesn't want to lie to Karen because she's someone he cares about. But he also doesn't want to reveal Matt's secret because that's someone he cares about as well. So it's personal line, it's like he's being torn in two, and it's really eating at him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As that scene ends, we do see that Karen makes a call to Ben, pleading the same from him as far as continuing on with the fight. And the scene jumps over to Ben in his office. She explains the situation with Matt and Foggy and how they are fighting, and she reveals that it feels like everything is falling apart. She asks for some reassurance, and he offers some wisdom.
Honestly, it was interesting. Like, I feel like that interaction, I guess Ben is not mad at her anymore. But the bigger thing that I focused in on was he was doing mm-hmm. research, right? And you made that connection earlier where Ben mm-hmm. mentioned Rigoletto. And he's looking into old newspaper files and zooming in on Bill Fisk's political campaign posters.
Man, that's a really nice catch. Because like I said, I picked up on the Rigoletto name, but I just thought he was doing general research. But it makes sense. He knows who Rigoletto is, and Rigoletto's the one who lent Bill the money. So that, I like that. I'm glad you picked that up, just because, well, for two reasons. The first note that I wrote down is like, I really like this continuous thread of Ben intellectually knowing that he shouldn't be involved in this case, but it's something that he just can't set aside. Like, even if he vocally tries to distance Karen away from it for her own safety, he can't heed his own advice. And something that I find important is going back to that first conversation where we learn who Rigoletto is and he's speaking to his informant. That scene takes place, I don't know if it's the exact same docks that Ben and Karen were at, but it's a very similar feel. And that scene was his informant realizing that he needs to move on. Like, he doesn't want to be caught up in the middle of this anymore. And so I like this role reversal. I don't like it because it makes me scared, but I like this this role reversal where we're back again at the docks. Ben knows he needs to get out. And if he wants to follow in the footsteps of the person who came before him, he should heed his own advice. And yet here we are, and he can't.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic thread you just pulled through.
I'm so scared. I'm so scared.
No, I mean, it is. Now, scenes like this do always annoy me just a little bit. And you've used Photoshop, you know.
Enhance.
Yeah, there you go. In fairness, that was probably taken on an actual film, that picture. And that does have higher resolution. And if you scanned it in at high resolution, you could zoom in and get it. So
he zoomed in right to it. I was like, man, what hotkey is that? I need that. I do like that meta commentary about them knowing the story is about to get good, right as everything feels like it's falling apart. I think that's a nice touch. I criticize them for patting themselves on the back with a Turk. You know, I respect a smart plan line, but I think I'm going to give them a pass here, specifically because it pairs back to that opening cartoon where we've seen everything feel like it's falling apart for our heroes, and you know, we see the tide turning.
Yeah. It's all starting to come together. You know, well, they only have 2 episodes after this to wrap it up.
We better hope
anyways.
they do.
You know, well, I mean, and I say that from the standpoint of we've been tracking an A/B cadence, and then we also notice where things are starting to pick up. You know, so yeah, and like you can feel that kind of tension building from one episode to the next, and you're kind of letting that A/B cadence go. Here we jump back to the hospital, where we have Fisk at Vanessa's bedside, saying a prayer and vowing vengeance against those who put her in this situation.
The thing that stuck out to me is that, you know, we've been tracking a way this show has drawn parallels between Matt and Fisk. And I love that they take the time to address Fisk's faith here as we're nearing the end game. Because like you said, he specifically mentions that he's never known true faith, and it's only been an imitation of faith based on what he's seen in movies. And so, again, as we're finding this inverse start to reverse where Fisk is falling and Matt's rising, we're learning that Fisk doesn't have that faith to fall back on. Meanwhile, Matt is having these conversations with Father Latham, and we're seeing how much faith plays into his character and how it's given him this renewed sense of guidance as this symbol.
Right. One of the things I mean, you mentioned that, like, he started with this, I don't know how to pray. In my note is like, he starts, I don't know how to pray. And then he goes on to start what could have been a very good, honest prayer. You know, I mean, not to get sidetracked, but I mean, the idea of prayer, right, is, you know, in a Christian context should be this relationship with Christ, and it's a dialogue. And so he's in a moment of that vulnerability and honesty. He isn't just regurgitating words anymore. He's being open to a relationship. So he actually starts what it would probably been his first real honest prayer, you know, there, but he's Fisk. And so we take it and turn it to, I'm still number one, I'm still first. and I will take vengeance upon these people, and no one can stop me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the continuous, he only knows how to solve things through violence. And this is just kind of coming to me in the moment, so this might not be fully fleshed out, but I'm going to go for it. You're talking about the relationship with prayer and how it's supposed to be your relationship with Christ. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting that he talks about how he only knew an imitation of faith. And we've seen he's been stuck as this child for so long. When he was at his lowest, he had no one there to guide him. So I think his inability to pray is that he doesn't know how to ask for help, because it's never been there for him. And the way that he's only ever been able to solve things is through violence. So for him to kind of tiptoe into that, almost getting to the prayer and then saying, no, I will be the one to strike them down, it just plays well with who we've known him as.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do want to say, I also love the wistfulness in Fisk's voice whenever he said he imitated faith based on what he's seen in the movies. It really illustrates that idea of how much is missing from Fisk's life, where his parental guidance was ripped away.
Right.
There's reverence in his delivery, and I think that's just a nice touch.
Right. No, it was a good scene for what's the actor's name again?
Oh, okay, here we go. Vincent D'Onofrio.
Nice. And I only asked just to make you say it. Okay. But you're right. It was a good moment right there. And how he delivered it, and it came across really well. Okay. So I just noticed a mistake we made. And so at this point, Karen wakes up. And what I believe forgot to set up a couple of scenes ago is at the end of that scene with Karen and Ben, Karen gets off the phone and walks up to her apartment door and is taken from behind. Now, in fairness, this part of the episode starts jumping around a lot with really short snippets, and I think both of us mentioned more about Ben than Karen in that scene. But at this is the point where Karen wakes up gasping for air as she's alone in this warehouse, and then Wesley is revealed to be her captor.
So I think the one of the biggest notes that I took away here is Wesley has a line specifically where he says, "I'm not here because I want to be. I'm here because I'm needed." And I think we finally got our answer about why Wesley looked so upset in that meeting with Gal.
Yeah.
He called attention to that feeling of being needed, and we see how much that means to him.
Oh, that's a really good catch.
And I like that they paired this with that revelation of how much disdain he has for the city and the people he views beneath them. It almost is conjuring this feeling of a completely untethered Wesley, and we've picked up on hints and his weird slip-ups throughout the season, and I think it's finally caught up to him.
Okay, a couple of things for me on this scene. One, he mentions that, again, we've been tracking this, his love of Fisk, where he's like, Fisk loves this city. I'm needed here. I don't love this city, and as you mentioned, how he just looks down on the people. Now, outside of that, me watching it, my note is, I feel like I'm watching Agent Smith from The Matrix. The cadence, the language, everything, the way he's talking. It's like when he's talking about Neo and not talking about Neo, when he's talking to Neo in the first movie when he's captured, and he takes out his earpiece and he's talking about how humanity is like parasites and how he doesn't like it in The Matrix. And, it just was really reminiscent of Agent Smith in that moment in the first movie and some other scenes in the other two. Which I haven't seen as many times as the first one, so I couldn't refer to him as well. So, you know
what I was thinking? I've seen The Matrix, but I realized earlier this year I was 9 when I watched it, and I haven't watched it since. I need to rewatch it.
Oh yeah, it's Netflix.
It might be. I think it is.
It was recently,
and I've heard it still holds up really well. So I need...
I would say the first one holds up.
Yeah, so I need to go back and watch that. It's interesting that you make that comparison to Agent Smith, because one of the notes that I took is that we've seen Wesley wax poetically before, but, in a similar way to Agent Smith. but there's something about the way he does it this time that feels too verbose. You know, talking about how like you made a choice that put you here at this moment tonight, and it just kept like it was weird, and it felt clunky.
Agent Smith.
And it felt clunky, especially. I just wish it would have had like another pass,
right?
Revealing a little bit, especially knowing that this is our boy's final scene.
Yeah. Well, okay. There's a quick scene with Fisk at the hospital that's so quick, and it interacts with what's going on here. So we'll address that in just a moment, and continue on with this Wesley Karen interaction.
Mm-hmm. And so the way that I can tie those two scenes together is one of the things we haven't really noted yet is that in this first part with Wesley and Karen, Wesley puts a gun on the table to kind of like threaten her. And he doesn't hold it. He just lays it there on the table. And one of the things I like is that there's a subtle look on Karen's part that I love. Whenever she deduces that Wesley hasn't told Fisk that she and Ben visited his mother, her eyes look right at the gun. And I think we start to see the moment she formulates her plan.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she looks for that opening. Yeah. Well, and we've praised this show from start to finish. You know, I'll finish in a couple of weeks. But so far, I mean, I don't think they're going to fall off in these last two episodes of having all those little facial expressions and like these subtle facial expressions, but doing a good job of showing us them so we get that information out of the scene. Yeah. Yeah. And that exactly happens here. And then even her reaction of like when he offers her the job and she kind of giggles, laughs a little bit, you know, which kind of shows in some ways she's still scared, but to me it kind of shows that she's not as scared as Wesley wants her to be.
Oh yeah, I mean because she's trying to throw some punches too. Specifically, as I was saying, she calls out the verbose nature of the script because Wesley is going on again, and she goes, "Is that supposed to be English?" And he gets frustrated and kind of states it in plain terms. In
plain terms, yeah. Well, and you know, and at this point, like she's had enough, and she's like, "Hey, just kill me already." And I feel like Wesley did a really good job. The actor here did a really good job of, you know, kind of having that intimidation of like, no, we're not going to kill you. We're going to kill Ben, you know, and because at this point, this is when she knows how bad she messed up. Because now Ben, they have his name and he's in trouble. And they mentioned my name, Foggy, Matt, everyone you ever loved and stuff. And I think you see that back and forth real quick where she has that look at the gun. She kind of loses a little bit of that fear or gets a little bit of confidence. But then in these lines with Wesley, like that fear starts creeping back in.
So eventually it gets to the point where Wesley, as he's kind of like intimidating her, Wesley receives a phone call and that catches him off guard enough for her to get the gun and eventually kill Wesley. And in this exchange, I think the thing I like is that both Karen and Wesley try to outbluff the other. But I like it a little less when you realize that Wesley calls out the flaw of a character as smart as him putting the gun on the table within reach of Karen.
Yeah.
And so, like, I go back and forth because we know Wesley is a capable force and making a mistake like this is beneath him, but it's not like it hasn't been set up all season. It just kind of feels like unceremonious for him to go out like this.
It does. I mean, hubris takes him down, and that's the way it should be. I also find it interesting that scene I just mentioned, that phone call that distracts him from Fisk, you know, basically is Fisk looking for Wesley and calling calling multiple times because after Karen shoots Wesley, you know, Fisk tries again. And I thought it was interesting that Wesley's choice to handle it himself and not let Fisk know, you know, is what really kind of what did him in, you know, that I'll take care of it myself, you know, is what allowed Karen to have that moment of like, oh, you didn't tell anybody yet, you know, and kind of, you know, so the slip up was more than just this moment.
I will say this, putting on my let's fix the script hat, if this was the route they were going to go all along, we recognize that they have taken time to set up the ways Wesley has slipped up, but I wish they would have done a little more service of ways that being Fisk's right-hand man was leading to his demise, or somehow demonstrate the imbalance of Wesley being at his every beck and call at the sacrifice of his own well-being. I think it just would have made that point of Fisk being the one who called hit just a little bit harder.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know how you would have done it. I think that is something you could have laid that seed and pulled that thread through a lot sooner.
Because I think if you would have done that, it would have been more impactful instead of this being like, oh, that's just bad luck. And then it ends with the scene just being focused on Fisk trying to make a call that's not being answered.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And the only reason why I wanted to reemphasize, yes, I think it's a good point, is my last note was more on Karen. And I just wrote, she does a poor job of cleaning the fingerprints. And I know she was in a hurry to get out, but no.
I made the joke about fighting crime, but this is the second time you've picked up on how to clean up a crime scene. Because I've missed him both times when it was Blake and Hoffman in the police precinct, and then this scene. So yeah, I mean that brings us to the end of the episode. Overall, I like this episode because it conjures that feeling of a calm before the storm. We've seen our protagonists hit their lowest point and watch our antagonists continually rise. And so we're finally starting to see that momentum shift. And it was clever of the opener to convey that with the cartoon in the beginning.
Yeah, that was very clever. I think what I liked about this episode is is in the planning how this is what we are kind of identifying right now as this belly of the beast for Fisk's character arc. And this is also where the character of Daredevil in Matt's mind, beyond just Man in the Mask, and kind of is born, right? And so you have this true, not just turning of the, we keep saying these turning of the tides, but actual choices that are made that push the characters in a particular direction, that there's no turning back from.
Yeah. Okay. And it's only exemplified by the fact we only got 2 more episodes left to go. Yep. But yeah, that is going to do it for our discussion of episode 11, The Path of the Righteous. But of course, we can't end without talking about our question of the week.
So Trey, this question I find interesting because this, I think, might be our first MCU maybe world building question. Do you think or feel like they're going to continue to have the Sokovia Accords impact Phase 4, or are they going to kind of let it fade into the background, make that part of the Infinity Saga, and not carry that through?
I think it almost feels like cheating to say I know they're going to carry on with it, because the first movie of Phase 4 is going to be Black Widow, which we already know takes place between Civil War and Infinity War.
Okay,
and
sure.
Her being on the run is because of the Sokovia Accords. But if we set that aside and say, okay, that doesn't, not that it doesn't count, but because it's a prequel, it doesn't answer the important question of is this something they're still going to continue on in the present, which is where we are with, say, Far From Home, even though that's technically Phase 3.
Right. Well, I mean, you have the third Spider-Man movie, right? That's going to be present. A lot of other things are going to be present as well. So
I hope it becomes something that they do carry on, because we do have Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and everything we know about that is that and I'm being careful here because I know there are people that try to remain as pure as they can and watch things with no trailers or information. So if you're worried about spoilers, maybe skip ahead a little bit. But we already know that there's this element of Sam having to prove himself as Captain America. And I can't imagine that won't tie in to the Sokovia Accords, given how much Steve was against the Accords. And then even if you jump in, like you were saying, to that Spider-Man 3, the way Far From Home ended, Peter gets outed and he is now wanted for the death of Mysterio. And they've never addressed the fact that even within Civil War, where Iron Man was clearly wrong, Iron Man had to use an unsigned superhero to help swing the tide of the battle. So it just feels natural that that would come back into Peter's storyline.
Yeah. And I'm with you. I feel like, well, let me step that back. I'm with you in the sense that I feel like they should pull that thread through because it was such a big part of Captain America 3. And we saw traces of it at the beginning of Endgame. We saw its impact in Ant-Man and the Wasp, right? And if they made such a big deal about it, like coming from the UN and those types of things, I would hope they don't just let it fade out or just find some way to write it out.
Yeah.
You know, I want to see them kind of pull that thread through and deal with the consequences of the stories they made.
Especially because that would undercut the severity of our heroes splitting in Civil War if that doesn't continue to be a huge thing.
Right.
Because you can make the argument, if it wasn't for them splitting, Infinity War ends with them beating Thanos, but because of the consequences of Civil War, they lost. If that's not something that continuously gets pulled through, then it makes their fight feel frivolous.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think they said they use that to set up them being divided to move into, you know, the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. But yeah, I'm with you. Like I don't think they can let that go.
I hope they don't. I don't think they will.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
All right, that is going to do it for this episode. If you'd like to chime in with your thoughts for Season 1, Episode 11 of Daredevil, or if you'd like to answer the question whether or not you think they will continue the Sokovia Accords thread, you can always reach us at MCU Need to Know on Twitter or at MCU Need to Know on Instagram. Or if you'd like to write an email, you can email us at mcuneedtoknow@gmail.com.
While you're doing that and online, please take a moment to give us a rating, leave a review. Your feedback is supremely helpful for us, and to keep the conversation going, please, share with a friend. Bring more to this discussion.
We'd also like to give a special thanks to Nick Sandy for the use of our theme song, which is his rendition of the Avengers theme. If you want to see more of his work, you can visit his SoundCloud, which is linked in the description. So, for whatever reason, I forgot to say goodbye. Oh, man. But yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. Until next week, thank you so much for doing this, Jude.
Thank you, Trey.
See you all next week. And by the third time, it almost starts to get this sense of like, is it not as important as Karen thinks it is? Or is everybody just given up?
Yeah, and Kevin. Damn.
Who's Kevin?
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. We're not taking a week off again.
No, I'm going to get that USB mic. I'm going to be prepared for when I go on the road.
Okay. I didn't know when I started a podcast I was giving up my holidays.
Hey, I just streamed for 4 years. Get used to it.
Intag.
I clearly got some vitriol built up from that.
Okay.